Welcome to Estes Park, the Scottish Festival here at the Longs Peak Scottish Festival, Irish Festival. I am Chef Eric McBride. I am the executive chef and owner of the Celtic Caterer based out of Denver for the past 10 years. I'm pretty much one of the only chefs out there that does all food of all 8 Celtic nations. There are other chefs out there, they're Irish chefs, and then there's some Irish chefs out there, and there's some more Irish chefs out there. Not too many go do Welsh or Scottish or anything else. We kind of blend all of it together. So today we're actually going to be doing is a creamy potato and leek soup with white wine. And this is actually out of my Irish cookbook here. So we're going to start off here because everybody will want to taste this a little bit. Anybody cook much with leeks at all? Anybody else? A couple of people out of there, a little bit here. Leeks are here in the United States, a very underused vegetable. If you're not used to leeks, they're very much like half a onion, half garlic in flavoring. Now, you're going to see some of the culinary stations out there, they're going to tell you, you only use this much. Now, a traditional Irish farmhouse, they're going to use everything. But you got to watch out because that's when it sits in the ground, it's the dirt level. And so you have to constantly keep wiping it out, washing it out to go and get it because it'll get into the rings because that's what. And so we're gonna trim this off and trim a lot of these off. You can buy leeks pretty much any grocery store. Better prices you're gonna get at like Whole Foods or Sprouts. These were actually bought at Sprouts. Sometimes even Walmart has them, good price. Thing about Walmart is they don't always know how much, it's per bundle, and so it could be actually more than you need. So we're gonna go, I'm just kind of cleaning these off a little bit because like I said, we're gonna get a little dirt. What we're gonna start off first, we're gonna melt a little butter. Now all 8 Celtic nations, which are, and if you don't know what the 8 Celtic nations are, they are Scotland, Ireland, Wales, the Isle of Man, which is a little island between all 3, Brittany, France, and Cornwall, which are actually very much related to each other. And the ones everybody forgets further down the European continent is Galicia and Asturias, Spain. And it's actually 2. Most people know about Galicia and they don't bother to do the research to find out that Asturias was another one. And there's actually other more solid Celtic communities around the world. There's one in the Pyrenees near Andorra. There's one in Italy near San Marino. There's actually kind of a hodgepodge area between Armenia and Georgia. They're the remnants of what was called Galatia. Then there's also one of the strangest areas is all the way on the very southern tip of New Zealand, in Dunedin, New Zealand. That one is kind of a remnants from the British themselves. So when the UK made Australia a penal colony, and of course, most of the people that were prisoners there were Scots, Irish, Welsh, you know. So they actually made sure that the guards were could understand what they are. So most of them were speaking Gaelic, Welsh, Scottish Gaelic. So in Dunedin, they actually brought their whole families down there in Dunedin, so they would rotate out their guards back and forth. So that's why, and still to this day, this community speaks the Scottish Gaelic dialect. It's very unusual, you know, for something on that end of the world. So like I said, I'm going to start off with a little bit of butter here. Now, I'm just using regular butter today, but anybody seen in the grocery store Irish butter, Kerrygold butter? You ever use that much at all? It's a little bit more expensive, and I have been told there are some places where you can buy it a little less expensive. But what's the difference? Why would you want to have that kind of? Primarily is because it has 3% more cream or milk fat per volume than any American butter, and 15% less water. So you don't have to burn off the water. It's also, they try to say it's reduced cholesterol level. And so there's some benefits for that. This Kerrygold also makes a really nice cheese. Obviously cheese made from butter and cream the same way, so it's going to have 3% more milk fat, and it all the way goes down to our heavy whipping creams, dairy creams, all of that. So I'm just going to melting a little butter, and then I'm going to take my leeks, because what we want to do is we want to go and get the flavor, that onion garlic flavor that I said that was in leeks, and the leek flavor itself. We want it to bleed out so that everybody can taste it in the soup. So that's why we're going to saute that. And we're just going to dice this up. Normally I like to have the rings, especially if I'm making something like a Potato soup. But we're going to chop this down because for time wise and also so that everybody gets a little taste. We're making a little brown butter out of this as well. So that's going to go and give us a little extra flavoring there. So if you've ever, I actually had a lady from Scotland who lives, I was doing a festival last year in Boise, Idaho. And she grows her own leeks up there. And this is how you normally see them in the store. This is how you get them. She brought me these leeks. And the greenness was so long you could tie it around a bar and it would be hanging on the ground. And that's the natural state. I've never been able to see them that way because Colorado's not been known for growing its leeks. Most of the leeks that are grown here in the United States, even though it's mowed for cold weather like Boise would be, most of where they get them is actually from Florida. But it's a really unique flavor that I like to use. So we get that, and we also got some onions chopped up. Save a little time, so we're going to go and put all that together. I'm going to add a little bit more butter. So now if anybody has any questions anytime during this day about Celtic cooking or about Celtic history, why people are using different items, please raise your hand, let me answer it stuff. I used to write a column in the newspaper. We all know the Celtic Connection. Actually, I still write one now, but wrote one that was called the Shenanigans, which was on Celtic history and mythology. And I wrote that for about 7 years, and we syndicated it out around a few places as well. But we always had a lot of people come up and ask me different questions about Celtic history and mythology. And that's where most of my cookbooks are like. They're like half a cookbook, half a history book. So not only do we have the recipes about this, but we have little history about, like in the last thing, about where the potatoes come from and how it affected the Irish population. One of the other things I'm going to talk about in this particular one here is seasoning. Now, most families, most gardens, Celtic, they grow their own herbs. And you would be surprised what the primary, can anybody think of what the primary herbs that are in almost all 8 Celtic nations? 5 primary herbs, and you all know them because you've sang the song. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, and tarragon. He just stopped it. I don't think it rhymed too much, but that is it. Thyme is the quintessential herb for all 8 Celtic nations. It is so abundant, they find it on the side of the roads growing. So like I said, I'm just opening up our onions and our leeks here just to get a little bit of flavoring for it all here. And you remember what I said, that the leeks have what kind of a flavoring again?
Garlic and onion.
There we go. So you just moved to the front row, didn't you?
I did.
All right here. So like I said, we're just gonna, now what we're gonna do is to accent it a little bit, is put a little white wine in. Now it really doesn't matter what kind of white wine. I'm actually using really cheap Chardonnay, but it'll open up. You don't want to put a sweet wine in. You do not want to put like a Riesling or so in there. But a Chardonnay, Chablis, if they're still out there, those kind of wines would be really good for it. But I think you want more of that oaky, woody flavoring for it, soft. There's a few other ones like a Vindicchio or something like that might work. So we're just opening it up, and I'm keeping my heat going, and then we're going to add in our potatoes. Now, to save time, I've actually already cooked our potatoes down. Now, the potatoes we're using are, let's see here, more what they would use over there. For us, we're using a yellow potato. There are over, I think, between 800 and 900 different types of potatoes out there in the world. And unfortunately, when you go to the grocery store, there's only, what, 5, 6 at the most. Sometimes this is called a Yukon Gold, but this is not necessarily a Yukon Gold. They can switch it all out, different things. In my cookbooks, you're going to hear things like a King Edward potato. That's what, basically, it's more of a yellow potato for it. You get a different flavor of it than if you're using russet potatoes or red potatoes. Now, I have used this soup with red potatoes, and it comes out really well as well. The flavoring for it, the less starch works. So we mixed all that together, and then we're going to mix in our stock. Now, if you wanted to make a vegetarian version of this, how many vegetarians are in the audience? 1, 2. So, unfortunately, I'm not using a vegetarian stock. I do have in the vegetarian cookbook a vegetarian stock that even vegan friends of mine have given me the blessing for. It's because it's done with fennel as well as carrots, onions, celery. But then we also put in little peppercorns and some bay leaves and some other flavoring in for it. We're going to be using today just a little chicken stock. One is because I think I like the flavor a little bit more. The only thing you have to watch out for with chicken stock is it tends to get a little salty. So I didn't add any salt in there here beforehand. The other things I'm going to add in, and if you were in the last cooking demonstrations, a couple of the spices that I like to use all the time, something we use in the culinary field. One of them is garlic powder. Garlic powder we call the addictive spice. Pretty much it's in guacamole, it's in chili, it's on your lady's potato chip. It's why you keep wanting to have one after another, the addictive spice. And I'm going to tell you a little story about this garlic powder. So I was doing this demonstration out in Elizabeth, Colorado this year. And a gentleman was sitting in the front row with his wife. And he's listening to me talk about all this and addiction. And he was being a little skeptical. Went home. Was looking through. Saw on his potato chip bag. Sure enough, garlic powder's listed there. Saw all these other things. Garlic powder's in there. So he started sticking his head in his spice cabinet. Was looking. His wife walks in. And he said, you know, she's going, what are you doing? And turns around and says, kiss me, please, quick. And she does that. She says, what's on your lips? It's garlic powder, addictive, isn't it? And she goes, yes. Of course, that's the G-rated version of the story he tells. So what we're also going to add in is a little white pepper. Now, white pepper is something like the French have used a lot. It is done from the inner side of black pepper. It's got its own little, or sometimes it's a younger type peppercorn. It's not as coarse, it's not as harsh, it's a little finer ground. It gives you the kick kind of behind the edge. You don't really know it's there. It doesn't overpower. And that's the big thing about Celtic cuisine. You don't want to have any one flavor so strong that it overpowers everything. So one of the things I really hated when I was a kid, or I mean eating Mexican food, I hate is the cilantro. I like cilantro, but they go and like put more cilantro in, more cilantro. You can't taste the onions, you can't taste the tomatoes, it's just all cilantro. That's fine, but you can overpower it too much. And I understand, as I was saying, when I was a kid and I worked at one of those fast food burger joints when I was 16, and you're having to go with these pre-makes so that you're not supposed to go and change the way they make their burgers and all that. They have a ketchup little dispenser and a mustard dispenser, and I was like, I'm not much of a fan of ketchup, but I love mustard. So I do half a thing of ketchup and then double mustard up. And so everybody was getting double mustard burgers from me. Not something you would do, and I understand now more in this where I'm doing for cooking. I want my food to taste the same way all the time. But that was not personalized. But that's what happens, unfortunately, when we go to a lot of these restaurants, is that the guys that are actually pushing the food out is the one they're altering to their own taste buds. And sometimes that's why if you've come to a one restaurant and it's like too spicy one week and not spicy and not that way the next week, that's who the real culprit is. And as an executive chef, yeah, it's something that we have to deal with all the time. You have to constantly keep backing and tasting everything to make sure it's on par. So the last thing we're going to add into this soup, really make it high end, is a little heavy whipping cream. Now in Ireland, in the British Isles, they have what they call single cream and double cream. Now, just like the butter, single cream is 3% more milk fat than our table cream. And their double cream is 3% more milk fat, 15% less water than our heavy whipping cream. And in this soup, they would use double cream. So it's actually even creamier than what we're going to taste today. If you really want to go and try to mimic it like the way to do it, you can use our heavy whipped cream and either sour cream or creme fraiche. And a combination of the two of those would make it to the creaminess level that they would have it there. And you can really taste it. If you've gone out to dinner in some of those places and their coleslaw that they're mixing is really, really good and creamy, that's what it is. So we're going to add a little bit of cream here. And I know I've had somebody ask me before, why don't I tell you how much I'm putting in each one? And it's primarily because I want you to buy the cookbooks. Always a reason behind everything. So we put a little cream in. Well, actually I have 3 cookbooks up there. We have a Scottish cookbook, an Irish cookbook, and a Celtic style vegetarian cookbook. And I've actually won awards in Top Chef charity competitions in Denver, Dallas, and Las Vegas in all 3 of them, and actually one other dish out in California. If you look at the Scottish cookbook back there, the blue book, I won for a cock-a-leekie soup. So I'm using those leeks again. It's a chicken and leek soup. I use white rice as kind of a filler thing. But then what's the big thing that the judges didn't recognize is that it was using dried plums. Dried fruit is a big aspect of Celtic cuisine. Dried herbs, dried fruit, because they're all making their own for it all. Farmhouse style. The other one we won for is a roast leg of lamb and a blueberry port wine demi-glace. That's actually got me more attention than anywhere else. A smoked salmon cheese pate, which is actually one of my favorites. We did that yesterday for a demo. And then a very decadent orange chocolate whiskey mousse, which maybe some of you might be able to try later. We also, in the Irish cookbook, won for an Irish asparagus blue cheese salad, which is something that we're going to go and make tomorrow at 11 a.m. Also a 3-time marinated Irish stew. Now here's what you take your little pot and you take your bits of lamb and you roll it in flour with a little bit of the seasoning. And you saute it in either olive oil or butter. Get up. But what the heat is doing is opening the pores in the meat. Because the next thing you do is you pour in a little red wine. And that meat just sucks that red wine right on in there and makes it really nice and juicy. Then as you build your stew, putting in your rest of your vegetables in, your water in, then you add a little Guinness in at the end. Guinness always makes good, but the Guinness works with the flour, making kind of a roux, beer roux, and it really opens it up, makes it a thick, dark sauce, a stew sauce for it all. So that's one that we've won with. And then also a Guinness chocolate walnut cake. Walnuts is another thing. The 2 quintessential nuts that are used in all 8 Celtic nations are walnuts and almonds. So the last thing I'm going to add in here is just a little roux that I made beforehand. Does anybody not know what roux is? Everybody, okay. A roux is a thickening agent. All it is butter and flour. And so when we open it up with the thing, it'll put a little heat with this, mix it in with our sauce. It'll make a much thicker soup base. So the last thing I want to tell you about was the vegetarian cookbook, vegetarian Celtic cookbook, which has kind of put my name on the base because no one's ever really thought about doing that before. A vegetarian Celtic cookbook is recipes from all 8 Celtic nations. And as somebody was saying, no, it is not all potatoes in there. There are quite a lot of other things. There's like a split pea soup that has a little molasses into it. We've also won awards for cauliflower and a whiskey cheese sauce, black-eyed peas and a honey whiskey butter sauce, which is a dish that when the Scots first came to North Carolina, they couldn't get a hold of navy beans, and that was the original recipe, so they adopted black-eyed peas instead. And then what I like to call Celtic fried cheese, which is something why I have no idea why they don't use up on the hill there, they serve it, is cheddar cheese, wrapped in Parmesan risotto with chopped celery, rolled in panko breadcrumbs, and then either flash fried or baked. And if you look at the vegetarian cookbook, there's a picture on the inside back cover. So we got our stew almost just cooking a little bit longer. I wanted to thicken up, and then we're pretty much done. Now, was this a hard dish to make? That's what the biggest fear is. A lot of people, when we talk about a new cuisine, Celtic cuisine, is they fear that it's going to be too complicated or too hard to make. Most Celtic cuisines are very simple to make, and they're just a little tweaking here and there by my 30 years experience in the industry to kind of build it up, bring it up. Somebody else has already done this with, right now, Brazilian food, or some people have done it with Italian food at one time. They've taken the extra steps and really raised the bar on it, and that's what I'm trying to do.